Hi everyone! After Kyle's amazing lesson last week on developing your ideas for your story and establishing your own rhythm, I'm going to focus on using imagery to spice up your story. Imagery is a technique that we employ in our story to further the narrative. To put it simply, a narrative is a story. There are many types of literature that are considered narratives, including novels, dramas, fables, folk tales, short stories, and poetry. Narrative techniques like imagery provide deeper meaning for the reader and help them to use their imagination to visualise the situation that you're describing taking place. So essentially, helps the story to feel more real and allows the reader to place themselves within it or get lost within it as though it were happening to them. Imagery is language that evokes one of the 5 senses to help the reader relate to what's being described in your story, as it allows them to get a more engaging and interactive idea of what is happening. You want to draw upon these 5 senses of touch, smell, sight, sound, and taste. For example, the night was as black as ever, but bright stars lit up the sky in beautiful and varied constellations which were sprinkled across the astronomical landscape. This draws upon the sense of sight, describing to the reader what they can see. Another example is the candy melted in her mouth and swirls of bittersweet chocolate and slightly sweet but salty caramel blended together on her tongue. This draws upon the sense of taste, enhancing the reader's experience and letting them feel like they're the one tasting the candy. There are different forms of imagery and ways that you can use them in your story. Visual imagery. This describes what we see, paintings or images directly experienced through the narrator's eyes. Visual imagery may include colour, such as burnt red or bright orange, shapes, for example, square, triangular, rectangular, size, for example, teensy, massive, gigantic, or even patterns, for example, polka dot or stripy. Another form of imagery is auditory imagery. This describes what we hear, from music to noise to pure silence. Auditory image may include pleasant sounds, for example music or birdsong, noises like the sound of broken glass, a shooting gun, a horn tooting, or the lack of noise in a story, which could be you describing a peaceful silence or an eerie silence and helping to build on the atmosphere. Another form of imagery is olfactory imagery. This describes what we smell. Olfactory imagery may include pleasant fragrances, such as perfume, enticing food and drink, blossoming flowers, or bad odours, like rotting rubbish, body odours, or smelly wet dog. Another form of imagery is gustatory imagery, which describes what we taste. This can include sweetness, for example candy, cookies, dessert, sourness, like bitterness and tartness from lemon and limes, saltiness from things like crisps or chips, or spiciness from things like chili and curries. Lastly, tactile imagery is also used and describes what we feel or touch. This can include things like temperature. For example, if your character's freezing cold, maybe they're roasting or there's some humidity in the air. Texture of objects that they touch. For example, something could be rough, ragged, satin-like, or smooth. Things that they touch and ways that they touch, for example, hand-holding and hugging, or perhaps movement, for example, burning muscles after sports, swimming in cold water, or kicking a football. Because we experience life through our senses, a strong story will appeal to a reader through the sense of imagery and the use of imagery. Descriptive imagery launches the reader into the experience of a warm spring day, a scorching hot summer, a crisp autumn, or a harsh winter. It allows the reader to directly sympathise with the characters and the narrator as they imagine having the same sensory experiences. Imagery commonly helps build compelling poetry and convincing narratives, and if you use it, you'll definitely have a compelling narrative in your own story. Another form of imagery could be metaphor. So specifically, a metaphor is the direct comparison of 2 distinct things. With a metaphor, an object, idea, or situation is referred to directly as something it is not. It moves away from referring to something in a literal sense and refers to it as something else in order to create a more imaginative figure of speech and description of something. Here are some examples below. Another form of imagery is simile, which is a form of figurative language in which a comparison is made between two things that have something in common, using the words like or as. The simile is used to describe an item, situation, emotion, or action by comparing it to something else in order to make the statement more creative and artistic. There are some examples below for you to read. Another tool for imagery is onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a form of auditory imagery in which the word used sounds like the thing it describes. A few examples are: the fire crackled and popped, she rudely slurped and gulped down her soup, and the pigs happily oinked when the farmer gave them their soup to eat. Personification is another tool used for imagery. Personification provides animals and objects with human-like characteristics. Here are a few examples. The wind whistled and hissed through the stormy night. The tired trees' branches moaned in the gusts of wind. And the ocean waves slapped the shore and whispered in a hiss as they withdrew again. In conclusion, these are just a few ways in which you can employ effective imagery throughout your short story to make it more exciting and spice it up. Remember that Kyle and I are here for any questions that you may have. And lastly, and most importantly, happy writing.